wonder why we paint and why we paint in watercolor? Well, this little sunflower painting reminded me of one of the very best reasons. Let's paint and chat about that. When I started this little painting, I started with two little words. What if? What if I don't bother to do any drawing when I start? What if I just put in the shapes with water? What if I use my flat brush, which has that square edge, instead of my typical round? This what if game is actually a really fun way to start a painting, because what it does is wake up the problem solving part of our brain. And that, I think, is one of the best things about painting, because painting really is problem solving from start to finish. We have something that we want to paint and we're solving the basic problem of how to capture that on the two-dimensional surface with whatever materials we've chosen. And this ability to answer questions, to solve problems, is just a human superpower, I think. It's something we did so well when we were children. But the more adulting we do, the less we kind of trust our ability to do this. So painting is such a fantastic way to remind ourselves at just how good we are at solving problems. I think watercolor is one of the best things you can choose to do this, because watercolor, as you probably know, is often said to have a mind of its own. And I think that this is one of my favorite things about it, because it means that it is an active participant when we're doing a fun little painting like this. It's going to do all sorts of its own things. And some of the choices I made this morning, like starting with the water and using a bigger, flatter brush, are all things that are going to encourage watercolor to do something that's perhaps a little bit unexpected. And that's going to make it even more fun for me to solve the problem of how do I turn these marks on the page into something that reminds us of sunflowers. The sunflowers are such a happy thing to paint, and particularly in watercolor. I'm sure you agree. If you're in a bad mood, you've got to try painting a sunflower. It's sure to perk you up a bit. By the way, if you love the idea of painting sunflowers in watercolor, I do have a whole class on that. It actually comes from my membership, and you can get the whole class and the whole library from the membership by joining us in the Happy Painters Hub. But I also offer the sunflowers class as a standalone one-off class. I'll pop the links to this in the description in case that's something that you'd like to try. You can see I started with my most obvious yellow and put in the biggest shapes, and then I realized I wanted a little bit more depth, so I chose a second shade of yellow and putting in additional marks where I can see darker shadows. And it's very exciting to start adding other colors, and this is where, depending on how quickly your paint is drying on your page and how thick the paint is that you're applying with the second color, you're going to have different results as far as the running together of the colors. I love it when the colors run together a little bit, but of course I'm also solving that basic problem of trying to have enough distinct shapes to show that this is actually a stem and not part of the petals, and so on. But let me get back to what I was saying about this what if problem solving that I think is one of the best things about watercolor painting. When you first ask yourself questions like, what if I start with no drawing? And what if I put in the water first? Inevitably, there will be some answers that come. You know, your brain will start trying to solve that problem. But one of the other things it does is start asking a whole lot of other questions too, like, oh, what if you don't get the shapes right? What if you put the flowers in the wrong place? I've come to think that even this is one of the reasons why we paint, and why we paint in watercolor, because it's where you get to trust yourself to make the best of it. Trust yourself to try something out. If something doesn't work out that well, you'll be able to come up with a solution. And if not, We also get to remind ourselves that it's just a piece of paper. It actually doesn't matter all that much. If it doesn't work out, we'll just find another piece of paper and start again. And this, I think, is another one of the most valuable reminders that watercolor painting offers us. The reminder that most things are not quite as serious as we make them out to be. And most of the time, we are more competent than we give ourselves credit for. So when you're painting, it's a chance to demonstrate to yourself that you can make a decision with responding to whatever happens on the page and make the most of it. And that even if you don't, you'll have had a rather marvelous time and enjoyed the process all the same. I always find it rather exciting to be putting in the darks. And I'm at the stage now where I'm putting in those seed heads. And I'm trying to make sure that I've got nice strong dark colour and a nice strong mixture of the pigment. I've also painted the flower that I probably started with first because it'll be a little bit drier. I'm happy for a little bit of that burnt sienna colour to seep into the petals and soften out a little bit. But this is one of the places where I am trying to make sure that I keep the centre mostly in the centre. And as soon as you pop in those darks, suddenly the painting comes to life. And it's a reminder of one of those questions that we were asking earlier. What if I get things in the wrong place? You know, sometimes you find that the thing that is in the wrong place, and I'm doing air quotes, I know you can't see them, but trust me, I'm sure you can hear it. I'm putting air quotes around the word wrong because there's never really anything wrong. It's more a case of being less preferred. So sometimes if you've put a petal at an odd angle or made a shape that looks a little bit awkward, sometimes that's going to end up being the flower that looks more lively and stops the painting from looking stiff and overworked. So sometimes it's when we let go a little bit, when we loosen up a little bit, that we actually make the paintings that are more enjoyable to do and more enjoyable to look at. I must say that loosening up my painting style has been one of the things that really changed watercolor painting for me and made it so much more enjoyable. It's something I get asked about quite a lot, so I put 7 of my best tips for loosening up your watercolor into a little guide. You can download it for free. I'll pop the links in the description and up in the card in case that's something that you might find interesting. At this stage, I've put in all of my sunflowers and I'm loving their lovely dark centers. And I could leave it at that, so I'm asking myself a whole new set of questions. What if I add something else to fill in the spaces? And I've been using a big brush. What if I change to my small brush and use that to capture use different brush marks that are going to suggest a different type of flower? I'm kind of looking at a few reference images to give me ideas. And I think I would like something, I like the warmth, so I'm going for a lovely orange, also because I've been really enjoying painting with orange recently, so it's something I wanted to include. And I like the idea of a sort of a more delicate flower, should we say. And it's so much fun to capture something like this, just with a few loose expressive marks, letting my brush, I've swapped to the rigger, which has very long bristles, and that makes it quite expressive. And it's really rather fun to just let that brush dance about a bit and create the suggestion of a different type of flower that might be a filler included with these sunflowers. I'm imagining that these sunflowers are in a vase, but I didn't really feel like painting the vase. I really just wanted to focus on the flowers themselves. And this is, I guess, even that is part of our what if. What if I did a painting that let me leave out the bits I don't feel like painting? In this case, the vase. Isn't it marvelous to be able to do these experiments and play with color all at the same time? Honestly, I don't understand why everybody doesn't want to do watercolor painting, because it is so very much fun. I've still got my rigger brush here, and I'm using the rigger brush to put in a little bit more of a delicate stem. And I didn't want to make it another green stem, so I'm going with the that was the same as the sunflowers. So I'm putting in darker marks to suggest those little stems of the orange flowers that I'm putting in. And it's also giving me a chance to add a few different foliage marks. This is something that the brush will do quite naturally if you let it. I do love this idea of painting being more of a collaboration between you and your supplies, rather than some sort of wrestling match where you're trying to be in complete control and dictating everything that goes on. I love the idea that between you and the colors and the brushes and the paper, you're going to create something delightful, and it's going to be delightful to make and might be quite fun to look at, but that's really not the point. I'm back to doing a bit more problem solving. I love the yellow of the sunflowers, and I really enjoyed adding that splash of orange. But one of the things I like is for all the parts of the painting to kind of talk to each other. And one of the ways to get that to happen is to be using the same colors throughout. And I do want the sunflowers to remain yellow, but I like the idea of adding a little bit more warmth. So I'm having a go. I'm asking myself, what happens if I add a little bit of the orange into the yellow sunflowers and try and do it without turning them into orange sunflowers? Watercolor is really good at layering because one of its key characteristics is that it is usually quite transparent. This varies across the colors, but my favorite ones, and the ones I tend to choose the most, are the transparent ones. And one of the things that I'm having a chance to play with here is figuring out how dry my original painting is, which means I will be able to put the next color on top as a kind of glazing layer, and you'll still be able to see the other color come through underneath. Of course, you can also do a different kind of layering. It's almost not like layering if you're working wet into wet, because the colors will be able to kind of mix together and form their own new version of the color. You're going to get both colors combined again, but in a completely different way. That's another reason why watercolor is so amazing. You know, you're combining the colors in different ways, either in dry layers or wet into wet, and you get completely different effects. But all of this that I'm experimenting with, the layering and the adding the colors, none of it would have been possible if I didn't start by asking myself all of those what if questions in the first place, which brings me back to my point of what a wonderful game this what if game is, and just how good we used to be at it. And it's something that I think we really can easily recapture, no matter how much adulting we've ended up doing, and how much that adulting has dulled our ability to just play and have fun, because it's when we do that that we actually tap into a whole lot of skills that we probably don't even realize that we actually have. I'm glad I've added those extra layers of color. It's kind of given my sunflowers a lot more depth than they had originally. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And in fact, I'm now solving a different problem altogether. My problem is that I'm having such fun painting, I kind of want to keep going. And it brings you to that rather awkward question of whether the painting is actually finished. I'm kind of looking for things that I could do to keep painting, but it's also an important part of the painting process to be asking yourself questions at the end. And these questions are questions about whether there is anything else that you could add that would improve the painting. Often for me, it's adding in a few more darks, because watercolor does tend to dry lighter. So one of the things that very often happens is that the things that felt like they were dark enough when you painted them, they probably were dark enough, but as they've dried, they've lightened up a little. So sometimes it's those darker areas that just need a little bit more, a little extra layer to give them a bit more oomph. And if I've added a little bit of an extra color into the centers, I can't help but put it down into where the leaves and stems are kind of joining, because I'm thinking there might be a few more shadows there, which will give those stems a little bit more volume. But eventually the time comes when the painting is finished. It can actually be quite hard to figure out when your painting is indeed finished. So I made a separate video all about that. It includes 7 signs that you'll be able to use to figure out whether or not your painting is finished. I'll pop the links up on the screen and you can watch that one next. Happy painting!